There is a sound that no one else hears but you. It speaks in the privacy of your own mind. And yet, it has more control over your destiny than the opinions of 1,000 others. It doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It whispers. And the tragedy is that you've come to mistake that whisper for your own voice. It tells you what you can't do, who you shouldn't be, and why you will never become what you once dreamed of. It speaks in familiar tones, the timbre of a parent, a teacher, an old memory, and says, "Be realistic. You're not ready. You'll just fail again." You think it's the voice of reason, but in truth, it is the voice of fear, wearing the mask of wisdom. Every human being lives accompanied by this subtle tyrant, a stream of inner dialogue so constant and so intimate that it becomes invisible. It narrates, judges, predicts, explains, and limits, and because it sounds like you rarely question it. But this whisper, this ceaseless monologue of self-doubt, is not an innocent companion. It is a sculptor of identity. With every word of self-criticism, it chisels a smaller, weaker version of who you might have been. You see, most of us were not defeated by external failure, not by lack of opportunity or raw ability, but by the quiet erosion of belief. We learned to internalize the voices of others until they became our own. Every childhood criticism, every comparative humiliation, every moment we were told, "You're not enough," became a seed that grew into this internal empire of doubt. Over time, it stops being a message you hear. It becomes the air you breathe. Bandura called this phenomenon low self-efficacy, the learned conviction that one's actions will not make a difference, that effort is futile, that one's own agency is insufficient to alter reality. It is not merely pessimism, it is paralysis disguised as prudence. The individual no longer even tries, because trying feels like self-betrayal. Why attempt to climb a mountain when you've already decided the summit doesn't exist for you? In this quiet mental theater, failure is not an event, it's a pre-written script. You enter the stage already certain of the ending. You perform half-heartedly, withdraw before the climax, and then tell yourself the tragedy was inevitable. This is the cruel brilliance of negative self-talk. It convinces you to play small and then congratulates itself for being right. But Bandura's insight was piercing, revolutionary. He saw that the true battlefield of human potential lies not in the world, but in the space between thought and action. The whisper inside your mind is not just commentary, it is command. It tells your nervous system when to fight, when to freeze, when to surrender. The body obeys. The will collapses. The person who could have spoken stands silent. The artist who could have created lets the canvas remain white. The student who could have mastered a skill stops studying. The entrepreneur who could have built something beautiful never begins. All because of one phrase repeated enough times to feel like truth. I can't. Imagine a caged bird that no longer needs bars. The door is open, yet it does not fly. Its wings have been trained to believe in their own futility. That's the human condition when self-talk turns against us. A mind that has absorbed enough self-doubt becomes its own warden. And here lies the first revelation. The prison of the human spirit is often made of sentences, not steel. Bandura spent his life studying this subtle prison not to romanticize it, but to understand its mechanism. Because if something can be learned, it can be unlearned. If a person can be conditioned into fear, they can also be trained into confidence. What destroys us is not the presence of self-talk, but the absence of awareness about it, the inner critic. When unseen, becomes law. But once you begin to observe it, its spell weakens. Think of it. When the mind whispers, "You will fail," the body tightens, the breath shortens, the future collapses into a single, narrow tunnel. But when the same mind says, "I might fail, but I will act anyway," the body loosens, energy returns, and the world expands again. The words are different by a single degree, yet the result is a transformation of life's entire geometry. Most people assume that thinking negatively is harmless, that it's just being realistic. But Bandura showed that thought is a physiological act. Each phrase you repeat about yourself doesn't just shape your mood, it programs your biology. When you tell yourself, "I'm not capable," your muscles literally lose tension, your blood vessels constrict, and your focus fractures. The body prepares not for victory but for retreat. The mind's prophecy becomes the body's reality. This is why the first step toward transformation is not motivation. It's recognition. Before you can change your life, you must notice the voice that narrates it. You must ask, who is speaking in my mind when I call myself weak? Who taught me to fear effort? Who convinced me that humility means self-erasure? The answers are uncomfortable. They often come wrapped in the faces of those we loved, those who raised us, those who tried to protect us from pain by limiting our vision. But understanding this is the beginning of liberation. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who hears them. You are not the critic. You are the consciousness the critic speaks to. And when you begin to see this distinction clearly, something magnificent happens. The whisper loses authority. It still speaks, but it no longer commands. Albert Bandura didn't simply study human psychology. He decoded the architecture of belief. He saw that every action, every achievement, every revolution of human behavior begins not with knowledge, but with the belief that one can act effectively upon the world. Self-efficacy is the quiet, invisible force that separates the dreamer from the doer, the defeated from the resilient, the stagnant from the evolving. But to understand how belief shapes destiny, we must first uncover its mechanism, how a thought becomes a law within the nervous system, how a simple internal sentence can alter the way the mind perceives reality itself. And that is where the true science begins. When a human being begins to believe something about themselves, truly believe it, that belief does not remain an idea. It becomes a living pattern, an architecture of perception. The mind, in its extraordinary complexity, does not separate what is imagined from what is expected. It begins to filter the world to confirm what it already assumes is true. And this is where the invisible machinery of negative self-talk begins its work. Albert Bandura understood something profound. We do not act according to reality. We act according to the interpretation of reality that our self-belief allows. A person with high self-efficacy sees a challenge and interprets it as a test, a chance to grow. A person with low self-efficacy sees the same challenge and interprets it as a threat, a confirmation of their inadequacy. The event is identical. The meaning is not. And meaning is what governs behavior. In the laboratory of the mind, every thought becomes an experiment in prediction. You say, "I'm not good enough," and the brain, loyal to your command, begins to collect evidence. It recalls the time you failed in front of others. It replays the moment someone criticized you. It distorts neutral feedback into humiliation. It magnifies weakness and filters out strength. In the end, your brain delivers what it thinks you want, proof that you were right about yourself. This is not delusion. This is the power of selective attention, a mechanism evolved to preserve mental efficiency, but which, when hijacked by self-doubt, becomes a perfect trap. You do not see the world as it is. You see it as your internal dialogue instructs you to. Bandura called this reciprocal determinism, the endless feedback loop between belief, behavior, and environment. What you believe shapes what you do. What you do shapes what you experience. What you experience reinforces what you believe. It is an exquisite, merciless circle. Let's trace it. A young person believes, "I am not good at speaking." Because they believe this, they avoid situations where they must speak. When they cannot avoid them, they approach with tension, their body trembling, their focus fractured. They speak poorly not because they lack intelligence, but because anxiety has short-circuited their access to it. The audience reacts awkwardly. The young person interprets that reaction as confirmation of the belief. "See, I knew I wasn't good at this." Belief fulfilled. Prophecy sealed. Now imagine that same mechanism multiplied across every domain of life. Relationships, careers, creativity, health, spirituality. Every "I can't" becomes a border around potential. Every "I'm not" becomes a wall between the self and its own becoming. You live inside a map drawn by fear, but the map is mistaken for the territory. Bandura saw in this pattern the psychological equivalent of a self-replicating virus. Once implanted, a single belief of inadequacy can generate endless variations of self-sabotage. It doesn't need to shout. It simply whispers assumptions that make you act small, and those small actions reinforce the assumptions. When the mind repeatedly produces such cycles, it begins to construct an identity around them. I'm not a confident person. I'm not creative. I'm not the kind of person who can lead. Each sentence is not a description, it is a spell. The brain, hearing it often enough, builds neural pathways to support it. And over time, these pathways become automatic. The negative thought no longer feels like a choice. It feels like truth. Bandura described this as the self-system, the mental framework through which we evaluate and control our own behavior. It is, in essence, the internal compass that determines how far we dare to go. The problem is that for many, this compass was calibrated by the wrong hands, by teachers who shamed mistakes, by parents who equated love with achievement, by societies that prize perfection over progress. When the compass of self-efficacy points toward fear, every direction looks dangerous. But here's the paradox. The same mechanism that traps you is the same one that can free you. The brain is not loyal to negativity. It is loyal to repetition. Whatever you rehearse becomes your reality. Bandura's research demonstrated that people who intentionally practiced self-affirming dialogue, not superficial flattery, but genuine reminders of capability and learning, began to display measurable changes in performance. They didn't magically become more talented. They became less inhibited. They unlocked what was already there. This is why Bandura spoke of the power of agency. To believe in one's ability to influence one's own experience is not arrogance. It is the foundation of sanity. Without agency, the human being becomes a spectator of their own life, reacting, apologizing, surviving, but never creating. You can see this mechanism play out in the smallest of moments. A person wakes up and says, "Today is going to be hard." The body releases cortisol. The shoulders tense. The world feels heavy before the first task begins. Another person wakes up and says, "Today will challenge me, but I will learn something." The same body releases dopamine, musculocin. The day feels like a landscape to explore, not a battlefield to survive. Both live under the same sky. Yet one breathes possibility while the other breathes defeat. The difference lies not in circumstance, but in the structure of belief. So what does this tell us about the human mind? That it is not an instrument of truth, but an amplifier of what it already assumes. The internal voice, when left unexamined, becomes a prophet of limitation. But prophecy, Bandura reminded us, is not destiny. It is a habit of prediction. And habits can change. Before the modern world spoke of manifestation or positive thinking, Bandura had already given us the scientific foundation for it. Not mystical, but measurable. Belief alters perception. Perception alters action. Action alters outcome. The circle can work both ways. The same feedback loop that once confirmed your weakness can be reversed to confirm your strength. But for that to happen, one must interrupt the cycle at its most fragile point, the moment before thought becomes behavior. That split second when you tell yourself, "I can't." If you can catch that phrase, hold it. Examinate. See it not as fact, but as hypothesis. You have already broken the spell, because awareness is the first form of freedom. And once that awareness begins to grow, something astonishing happens. You start to notice the machinery behind your emotions. You begin to see that what you called fear is often just the body's readiness misinterpreted. That what you called incompetence was simply inexperience mistaken for identity. You begin to see that every no you told yourself was a form of self-protection from imagined pain. The mind, left unchecked, will always choose comfort over growth. But the self that grows must learn to endure discomfort as the cost of liberation. Bandura's brilliance was to show that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of belief that fear can be managed. And belief, unlike emotion, is trainable. So when you hear the whisper again, that soft, familiar prophecy of failure, you can pause and say, "I know what you are. You are the echo of old conditioning, not the voice of my future." This is not denial, it is psychological accuracy. From here, we move deeper beyond the invisible mechanisms of belief into their physical consequences. For the mind does not merely dictate behavior, it instructs biology. The language you use about yourself translates into chemical signals, muscle responses, and neural configurations. To understand how deeply your thoughts shape your being, we must now turn inward into the body itself. Every thought is an instruction. Every sentence you repeat about yourself, whether whispered or screamed in silence, is a neural command that your body obeys with perfect loyalty. You may think the words "I can't" are harmless, that they exist only as abstract sound within your head. But biology listens. It always listens. Albert Bandura demonstrated, long before neuroscience made it fashionable, that the boundary between thought and physiology is an illusion. The mind is not a ghost floating above the body. It is the body's most intricate system of control. When you say, "I'm not enough," the words do not stop at the skull. They travel through neural networks, ignite hormonal cascades, and sculpt the state of your entire organism. Your heart rate shifts. Your breathing shallows. Your muscles subtly contract, preparing for defeat. Your immune system, which relies on psychological safety to function optimally, begins to weaken. This is not philosophy, it is physiology. When your internal dialogue predicts failure, your nervous system begins to live as if failure has already happened. The body prepares not for possibility, but for protection. It contracts rather than expands. It conserves rather than invests. It hesitates rather than reaches. And in that hesitation, life passes you by. Bandura observed this in athletes. Two individuals, identical in skill, strength, and preparation, yet one performed flawlessly under pressure, while the other crumbled. The difference was invisible to the camera, but obvious in the data: heart rate variability, muscle tension, cortisol levels. The one who repeated, "I've trained for this, I can do this," showed a nervous system in harmony. Energy directed outward, clear focus, calm execution. The one who whispered, "Don't mess up, don't fail," showed K's constricted blood vessels, rapid breathing, shaking hands, the same body, sabotaged by a different sentence. In everyday life, the same principle plays out quietly. A student facing an exam, a parent trying to discipline a child, an employee presenting an idea to their manager. When the thought pattern of inadequacy takes over, the body collapses into what Bandura called learned inefficacy, the biological echo of learned helplessness. Even simple tasks feel monumental. You feel tired before you even begin. You confuse exhaustion with proof of incapacity, when in reality, it is the fatigue of constant self-opposition. You are fighting not the world, but your own nervous system. And the irony is that the system is only trying to protect you. The brain interprets "I can't" as danger. It activates the amygdala, the same primal alarm bell that once saved our ancestors from predators. But there is no tiger. There is only the imagined humiliation of trying and failing. Yet the body does not distinguish. It reacts as though the threat were real. Your bloodstream floods with cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals were meant for sprinting and survival, not for creativity or calm reasoning. In this biochemical storm, your prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, planning, and memory partially shuts down. You literally think less clearly when you doubt yourself. The body obeys the mind's lie with exquisite precision. And this is how the self-fulfilling prophecy becomes not just psychological but biological. You predict your failure, and your physiology arranges itself to ensure that you perform poorly enough to prove yourself right. The loop closes. The belief becomes embodied truth. Bandura used to say that human beings are not just thinkers of their reality, they are enactors of it. The nervous system is like a loyal servant that takes the master's words literally. If you command it to prepare for humiliation, it will. If you command it to prepare for mastery, it will. It has no sense of irony, no understanding of metaphor. It simply follows instruction. When this truth is understood deeply, self-talk is no longer trivial. It becomes sacred. Every sentence you allow to echo in your consciousness is a form of programming. You are not speaking to yourself. You are speaking into yourself, into the muscles, into the cells, into the very chemistry that determines your vitality. Bandura's later research touched on this bridge between psychology and biology, revealing that high self-efficacy literally enhances immune function, reduces cardiovascular strain, and accelerates recovery from illness. Confidence is not arrogance, it is medicine. Doubt, chronic and habitual, is not humility, it is physiological poison. And here lies the most terrifying beauty of human nature. Your body does not argue with your beliefs. It does not ask for evidence. It takes your word as law. If you wake each morning thinking, "I'm so tired of this life," your cells begin to behave as if life itself were a burden. If you wake instead and whisper, "I can handle what comes today," your biology shifts toward engagement, toward readiness. The neurotransmitters of focused dopamine, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, come online. You feel alert, capable, alive. We often speak as if willpower is a purely mental phenomenon. But Bandura revealed that willpower is biological energy, the alignment of the mind's command with the body's response. When the two move in harmony, even fatigue becomes fuel. When they move in conflict, even rest feels like despair. But what happens when this misalignment continues for years? When the internal dialogue of defeat becomes a permanent soundtrack? The answer is written in countless lives, in the silent epidemic of underperformance, in the dull ache of untapped potential, in the exhaustion that no sleep cures because it is not physical but existential. You are not tired, you are restrained. You have trained your biology to live in a constant state of defense against imagined failure, against invisible criticism, against yourself. The muscles have learned to tense at opportunity. The mind has learned to confuse safety with stagnation. And yet, somewhere deep within the system, something still resists. A spark, the original impulse toward growth, still pulses, muffled but unextinguished. It is the part of you that senses, even in despair, that life was not meant to be lived half awake. That spark is the seed of self-efficacy, the biological readiness for mastery. It is always there, waiting to be summoned. To summon it, however, one must first re-educate the inner voice to teach it a new language, a new tone, a new purpose. For if the body obeys the mind, then liberation begins not with effort, but with reprogramming. The old command must be interrupted, rewritten, spoken anew. And that is where the next transformation begins, in the gentle but deliberate art of cognitive reprogramming, learning not to silence the inner voice, but to make it speak truth instead of fear. Imagine the mind as a classroom that never closes. In it, there is a single student and a single teacher, both are you. The teacher speaks, the student listens, day after day, year after year. Lessons are repeated. You're not capable. You'll never get it right. You should have known better. The words sink in. And over time, the student stops asking questions. He begins to believe that failure is his natural language. This is how belief becomes identity, not through violence, but through repetition. Albert Bandura's genius was to show that what has been learned can be unlearned. The same way the mind trained itself into helplessness, it can be trained back into confidence. The key is not suppression, but substitution, not silencing the voice, but teaching it to speak differently. The critic doesn't vanish, it changes jobs. It becomes a coach. Reprogramming begins with awareness. You cannot rewrite a script you've never read. So the first act of liberation is to listen, not to obey, but to observe. Begin noticing the language of your inner world. How do you describe your efforts? Do you say, "I always fail"? Or, "I'm still learning"? Do you speak in absolutes or in progressions? The difference between "I can't" and "I can't yet" is the difference between death and development. Bandura emphasized this small, miraculous word "yet." It reintroduces time into the equation of the mind. It tells the brain that ability is not fixed but evolving. I'm not confident yet. I don't understand this yet. I haven't succeeded yet. That word is psychological oxygen. It turns a closed door into a hallway. The next step is what Bandura called vicarious experience, learning through modeled examples. When you witness someone like you succeed, your brain recalibrates its expectations. It whispers, "If they can, maybe I can." That whisper, when nurtured, grows louder than the voice of doubt. It is not envy, it is evidence. It teaches the nervous system that competence is not an innate gift, but a learned behavior. But modeling alone is not enough. Bandura's experiments showed that mastery experiences moments of personal success, no matter how small, are the most potent fuel for self-efficacy. You cannot think yourself into confidence. You must earn it through action. Every time you follow through on a task you were afraid to attempt, you are teaching your mind a new lesson. I am capable. The lesson is small, but the biological shift is enormous. Dopamine fires in the reward circuits. Memory encodes the success. The next challenge feels slightly less impossible. This is why progress must be acknowledged deliberately. The modern mind, addicted to comparison, overlooks its own victories. You may conquer a small fear, a phone call, a conversation, a presentation, and immediately dismiss it as insignificant. But to the nervous system, these moments are gold. They build the evidence base of your self-efficacy. If you ignore them, you are tearing up your own diploma each time you graduate from fear. Bandura also taught that the emotions accompanying effort must be reinterpreted. The trembling before a challenge, the quickened breath, the pounding heart, these are not proof of weakness. They are signs of readiness. The body is not saying, "You will fail." It is saying, "You are alive." The same physiological arousal that precedes panic also precedes peak performance. The difference lies in interpretation. A runner at the starting line feels the same heartbeat as the anxious speaker before a crowd. One calls it energy, the other calls it fear. The body obeys the name you give it. So call it energy, call it preparation, call it the pulse of potential moving through you. The body listens. The final pillar of cognitive reprogramming is the conscious restructuring of inner dialogue. You cannot eradicate the voice that doubts you, and you shouldn't. It is part of the mind's immune system, meant to protect you from arrogance or danger. The goal is not to silence it, but to civilize it. When it says, "You can't," respond, "Maybe not yet, but I will learn." When it says, "You always fail," reply, "Then I have always learned something." This is not naive positivity, it is rational defiance. Over time, repetition works its quiet magic. The critic softens. The mind begins to default to encouragement rather than condemnation. The same mechanism that once chained you now lifts you. The neural pathways of defeat grow quiet, while the pathways of self-trust strengthen through practice. You are literally reshaping the architecture of your brain. Bandura's research confirmed this with astonishing consistency. Subjects who practiced self-affirming internal speech showed not only improved performance, but measurable neurological adaptation, increased activity in regions associated with motivation and self-regulation. Thought became biology once again, but this time in the service of growth. And something else happens. Something subtle yet profound. When you begin to speak kindly to yourself, time changes. Texture. Life no longer feels like a test you are doomed to fail. It becomes a conversation with your own becoming. You start to treat mistakes as feedback rather than verdicts. You learn to rest without guilt, to strive without fear, to exist without constant self-interrogation. You begin to see yourself not as a fixed personality, but as an unfolding process. This is liberation, not from the world, but from the mental tyranny that interprets every experience as evidence against your worth. Bandura's idea of self-efficacy was never about arrogance or self-flattery. It was about reclaiming authorship. You cannot control every event in your life, but you can control the meaning you assign to those events. You cannot silence the storms, but you can choose whether to call them curses or catalysts. The art of reprogramming is the art of narration, rewriting the story the mind tells about itself. until it aligns with possibility instead of fear. The goal is not to become someone else, but to remember who you were before you learned to doubt yourself. And once you begin to live in that awareness, the world begins to reflect it back. Opportunities appear where before there were walls. People respond to your energy, as if something unseen has shifted because it has the quiet authority of someone who believes in their own capacity radiates far beyond words. It changes posture, tone, presence, even fate. Bandura's message was both scientific and sacred. Belief is not illusion. It is the bridge between potential and performance. When you believe you can influence your environment, you begin to act as if it were true, and by acting, you make it true. This is not magic. This is human agency in its most elegant form. But there is one more layer, one deeper truth that sits beneath all of this, a truth that transcends psychology and enters the realm of spirit, that the human being, once awakened to their own efficacy, no longer fears failure, because they understand that the self is not measured by outcomes, but by engagement. What matters is not whether you succeed or fall, but whether you remember that you are capable of trying again. And that brings us to the final movement in this unfolding, the reflection that ties all of Bandura's work together, the rediscovery of self-belief, and the vast human potential. It awakens when the mind finally stops fighting itself